Meet people who've moved beyond their own struggles and share their stories of hope so that others may be inspired to do the same. Next on Speak Your Mind. Welcome to Speak Your Mind. I'm Dr. Carolyn Phelps, licensed psychologist with the Human Development Center. We're ending our 6th season of the show tonight with some inspiration for you. Until we return with a new batch of shows next fall, our theme tonight is Out of the Shadows, Stories of Hope, and our guests have motivating stories of perseverance and triumph over some very challenging situations, and we're really very honored to have both of them here tonight. You can sit back and relax and put the phone away because we're not going to take calls tonight, because I just want you to listen to what our guests have to say. Joining me now is Mark Wick, the head men's hockey coach at the College of St. Scholastica. He also lives with depression and is here to share his journey of recovery and resilience with us. And Alexis Adubobi is the current Miss Minnesota International, whose speaking platform has been focused on educating others about domestic violence. Along with being a senior at UMD, she too is a survivor of domestic violence. Thanks to both of you for being here tonight, and I so appreciate your coming. This is just such a wonderful way to close our 6th season. And the way we're going to structure this show is that I'm going to have each of them tell their story first, and then we're just going to open it up and have more of a conversation for between the three of us, but I really want you to hear these very compelling stories. And Mark, we're going to talk with you. I introduced you as, first of all, the head hockey coach at St. Scholastica, and you've been there for quite a while now.
12 seasons.
12 seasons.
Years.
That's quite a while.
Yep.
And you went public about your depression in the newspaper, that's how I kind of came to contact you, even though, and you and I have known each other for a long time. But start and tell us, when in your life did you first start having problems with depression?
Well, that's a good question, and that was kind of my problem. You know, I was in total denial. You know, I like to say I've suffered with depression, but I never faced it. You know, I was always, the way it manifested itself in me was so different, so I could always justify it, because the way it manifested itself in me was the anger, the outburst, the yelling. It wasn't, you know, the traditional what you think of with depression, where I was just sad or, you know, lethargic or that type of stuff. You know, mine came out in the anger, and I'm in a sport where that's accepted, and it's easy to hide, and, you know, and I could always justify it. You know, I was that way when we lost, or that type of stuff. So for me, you know, I never really admitted it. My wife would say it to me, but I was like, no, that's not it.
And so were you only angry then in that context, like when your team was losing, or were you also angry in your personal life as well?
I was very angry in my personal life as well, you know, but again, I would always justify that as because the team's not doing well, or things aren't going, you know, the way that I want them to do, and that type of stuff. And everything was very hidden. You know, and nobody would know, and the comments that I had.
Now, it was hidden, and I just want to share with you, because we do go back, that I would never have known that. Never have known that, because, you know, you just in my association with you, you were the happy guy. You brought joy into any room that you walked into. And I think a lot of people with depression, that's a very similar experience, this sort of mask of everything is okay.
Absolutely. People said to me at the end, like, oh, you know, I kind of saw something, I wish I would have said something. And I always tell them, I'm glad you didn't, because that would have just forced me to hide it more. And, you know, you get very good at hiding it and finding out how far you can go. And it's really, you take it out on the ones that you care about the most. And for me, I took it out on my family, my wife, my kids, my team. You know, everything was behind closed doors, but, you know, I had many comments like that. I would have never guessed in a million years you suffered from that. And that's what I said. You get very good at hiding it, and that was my defense. And I hid it until I couldn't anymore.
And then what was the breaking point with that?
You know, I had for the first time, you know, suicidal thoughts in early January. I It's the first time I seriously contemplated when we were on a trip out in New York. And then when I came home, you know, kind of went back and forth. And that last weekend, January 31st, we had lost a game. I blew up after the game, you know, with the other coach, and I got in the locker room, and I was in the coach's office, and I was almost like paralyzed, like I couldn't move. I sat there for a long time. Jackie McMillan, our women's coach, came in, waited till all the other coaches left, called my wife, came back in and said, hey, what's going on? You know, and then my wife showed up. She was at the game, but she'd gone out for dinner. She came back and she said, that's it. We're done. We're taking care of this right now. Because she knew, but I would never admit it. You know, I was taking some meds for depression. It was the wrong prescription. I was taking them the wrong way. But I said, I'm taking them, so it can't be the depression. And she just kind of said, that's it. We're going to get this taken care of. And, you know, my wife is a medical person. She's a take charge person. And she just said, we're going to get this taken care of. And she did. And that was the big change. I couldn't control things anymore.
Was that a relief at that point in time when people sort of then came and said, we need to do something, we need to kind of get you help?
That was a relief, absolutely. And the biggest thing was, I remember Dana Moore, our volleyball coach. I didn't answer any text or return anything the first week. I really was secluded, and everything went through my wife, you know, where I didn't want to talk to people. And finally Dana Moore, whose husband had passed away, she called me and said, you know, I'm pulling the dead husband card. You were there when my husband passed away. I need to be there for you. And I called her, and she had known, because word had kind of spread. I shared with my team why I was taking the leave, the depression. And when I said it to Dana, it was like a 1,000-pound weight was lifted off my back. That
wow.
The secret was out.
Wow.
Now it's out there, so now I don't have to hide it anymore. And I'll never forget that. She was the first person, you know, one of the first people that I told that wasn't in that real inner circle. And I made it public, and that was a huge relief.
So that one of the things that we talk about is that secrets create a sense of shame, and so the way out of that sense of shame is to unburden, is to let go of the secret. Then, and so for you, you took a leave of absence. Was that helpful?
That was. You know, I went down to the cities. I saw a psychiatrist. I got on the right meds. I got back up here. I hooked up with a counselor. You know, I said, it was a referral. I said, I'll go there, but it's somebody I have to connect with. I have to feel comfortable with, and it was awesome. You know, and I still continue to see him to this day. And that was all the start of the process of, you know, just facing everything and listening to him. And you know, he made me, you know, really look at it. And you know, one thing that he always said was, you know, your problem's not the depression, it's the way you handle the depression. And I wasn't handling it. So so yeah, that time off was a huge healing time for me at that time.
We're gonna sort of switch tracks here and listen to some of your story, Alexis.
Yeah.
And so your story kind of comes in two parts. And as I said in the beginning, Alexa's experience was in being exposed to domestic violence, and she's a survivor of domestic violence. But that first started for you actually in childhood, right?
Yes, yep. My father was physically abusive to my mother and my siblings and I. So right away at a young age, I mean, I was pretty much kind of thrown into it. You know, my father was very violent, also emotionally abusive. So to me, that was normal. That's what I knew. I had become so, it was just my norm, you know. So I didn't really think anything of it until as I got older. And I started to make the choices that I had made that led me into eventually my own relationship that was also violent and abusive.
So when you were growing up, because you mentioned that living with domestic violence was kind of normal for you, and we see this a lot with kids who maybe, you know, they're either in your situation or they have a parent who has a substance abuse problem, and they think like, well, everybody's parents just must do this. At what age did you start realizing that this is not how everybody lives?
It probably wasn't until my mom packed us all up and moved to Minnesota. We're originally from New York, and when I moved, I was about 9, and finally experiencing a normal childhood, and finally having friends, and then going over to their family's house and just seeing how their life was, and then realizing like, oh my goodness, mine is definitely not this way. Why wasn't my dad there for me? You know, why couldn't they just be together? And you know, just seeing the love and the happiness. And I know all families have their problems, but when you're a child and you see like your friend's family, everything in your eyes just looks like picture perfect. So that's kind of what I thought, and that's when I had realized like, oh my gosh, I pretty much came from a broken home, and that was a hard pill to swallow, because I think it just I eventually started having low self-esteem. Like I didn't really have any self-worth. I felt like I wasn't really worth anything.
And then what was that like for you during your teenage years as you grew a little older?
As I grew older, I didn't really realize I was experiencing some of the effects of a child who grew up in a domestic violence home. I was an athlete. I excelled. You know, I did sports late in age, obviously because of my childhood, but I was happy, you know. But then as I got older into 16, 17, I started to become angry myself. I mean, I was just enraged. I would be enraged towards my family. I really started to resent my mother a lot more, because I felt like as a parent that she was selfish. I felt that she should have left. I felt like she put her own
earlier than she did.
Yes, earlier than she did. I felt like these were the things that I felt, and you know, and it took me a long time to realize that she did the best that she could with what she had. And so, but during that time when I was in my teenage years, you know, I'm getting ready for college and you know, everything like that, and my dad's not there for graduation, you know, it's only just my mom constantly. And you know, and when I see, like I said, I would see my friends and their family, they would have their dads there, their whole family there, and it wasn't like that for me. So I just became very, very angry with her, and I just blamed her for my childhood. Like I felt like she had robbed me of that. And so yeah, I was not a very nice child.
And then so, you know, so interesting because both of you have these experiences which are were really difficult experiences and very different experiences, but one of the ways that you each experienced that was just by becoming angry. And we know that that's often the way sometimes depression and sadness is felt. You know, you mentioned the low self-esteem from that, right? That it's not, it isn't felt always as sadness and depression. It's felt as being more irritable and rageful, and that's a shared experience that you have, even though you have very different personal stories. Then you get into your own relationship.
Yeah, yep. I eventually met my abuser at the time, shortly outside of college, and you know, things were great. He was very attentive, and you know, he was there when I wanted him, when I needed him, and he would shower me with gifts and compliments. And you know, I never really, that was kind of the first time that I felt very loved and very wanted. And what was very interesting about our relationship was he too also came from an abusive home. His father, our stories were literally identical. He had a father too that was abusive towards his mom and his siblings, and his mom packed up and left. And so we immediately just kind of connected on that. And so we kind of had it in our head that, you know, we are going to build our own life without our family. Like, this is just us. Like, you know, that type of mentality. It's me and you against the world, you know, and that just wasn't realistic. And so, you know, and eventually he just got very possessive, and it was just baby steps. And then eventually it was full blown out fights, and to where they were violent and escalating every single time, to the point where he wanted to end my life. And so for me, that was that cheesy saying, like, you see your life flash before your eyes, like, it's very true.
But that actually happens.
Yeah.
It's a cheesy saying because there's some element of truth to it, that really does happen to some people. And Alexis, had you had the experience sort of during your growing up years, which I'm not going to be like my mom, I'm not going to get involved in a relationship where that would never happen to me?
Oh, absolutely. Especially in my teenage years, I was, you know, during that time when I was really resenting my mom, I would say, like, I don't want to be like you, you know, and that was my biggest fear, to end up like that. And I just realized I did not deal with my own demons, and that is what led me into my own abusive relationship. And it's, the cycle of abuse is something that's so true, you know, until you can really look inside yourself and really do some deep healing, you will end up in the same situation over and over and over. You will pick the same partner over and over and over. And so, and that's what was happening to me. I had realized also too, before my abuser, I had been in relationships too where they were either controlling or they were, say, they were emotionally abusive. And so I had just realized it was like a stepping stone.
Yeah, they may not have been threatening your life.
Yeah, exactly.
But we shouldn't just settle for he's not threatening my life, therefore I'll stay.
Which
right?
is very common, you know, especially for a lot of victims who, you know, don't feel like, well, he didn't hit me, so, you know, I haven't been abused, when in all reality, yes, you have. And so that's where I was. I used to think that same way. And then when I finally was with somebody who was bold enough to put hands on me, that's when I was like, oh my goodness, like, I'm in an abusive relationship. But it just, I had realized way early on, before I even met him, that I had been in several abusive relationships. And it was just because I did not get healed in certain areas of my life, especially dealing with my childhood and with my father.
How did you get out?
Eventually, I checked into a women's shelter, Alexandra House in Blaine. That's my hometown, and I stayed there for 30 days. I didn't want to do it anymore. And so that was really hard, staying in a shelter, but it was necessary because I knew that God had a different plan for me. I knew that my life wasn't over. I knew that this was my opportunity to start a new chapter. And so I had packed up, and then there was a this program that they had where they can pay for like your first month's rent and your security deposit, and I applied for it and I got it through the shelter, and I had just been accepted to UMD, so I packed up and moved up here. So I've been up here ever since finishing my education.
The other shared sort of commonality that I'm hearing is, you know, yours was at that game where you said, like, after the game you were just paralyzed and couldn't move. There was this outburst, but then it's just sort of this total paralysis. For you, this having to, like, I have to go to a shelter moment. Both of those moments just sound really difficult. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, they are, because I think, like in my case, I didn't really know what I was dealing with. You know, I don't, know how I'm supposed to react, what I'm supposed to do, who I see for something like this. And I'd really, again, I was still in that denial phase of all that type of stuff. So, had my wife not been there, like, I didn't know what to do at that point. So, that was the struggle, and that's kind of the whole thing with depression is, we don't talk about it enough. People don't know how to respond to it, how to act, how to react to it, what to look for, what to say to people, all that type of stuff. So it is just, you're in that situation and you don't know what to do because you never saw yourself in that situation. It's not something we'd plan for.
Well, I really like what you just said, that we don't picture ourselves in that situation, and especially, you're a very successful person, and that's not part of the picture of success that most of us have in the United States of America, right? For you, was that your hardest experience, that the going to the shelter moment?
Well, absolutely, because my life had been so chaotic, and then I just didn't realize when I was at the shelter, I'm like, great, so now these people are putting rules on me and all this stuff, but it's really just to add structure back to your life. But it's extremely difficult because, I had a roof over my head, and then in the blink of an eye, I didn't. And I literally had to start from scratch to rebuild my life. And that's extremely hard, and just to even have, get the necessities, like, soap and toothpaste, like, they provide all of that, which is amazing, but it's still, it's hard. It's really, but also too, like, I knew that I couldn't leave. I was like, I can't turn back, which is very common for a lot of victims. On average, it takes about a woman 7 times to leave her abuser. It took me 4. So, it's very, very difficult. And I finally just said, like, enough was enough, because I was so just drained and exhausted. And I knew that if I went back, like, I wouldn't be here. So I just did what I had to do.
In the progression from where you were at that hardest moment to where you are now, was that, like, all easy? going for you?
Oh my gosh, absolutely not. Like when I came to Duluth, I was extremely reserved. I definitely had a wall up around me. I didn't trust anybody. And, you know, it was until I had met an advisor at UMD who coincidentally went to the Vineyard, and that is kind of where a lot of the healing had started for me. And that's where I gave my life to Christ a couple of years ago, and it has been absolutely life-changing. And one thing that I've definitely learned is that you can't move on in life from any obstacles without community. Having that people that truly genuinely love you for you, good or bad, you know, they take the bad with the good, and they're there to constantly uplift you. And for me personally, I had those people that constantly kept pointing me to the feet of Jesus. And I still have those people in my life. And there are days even still now, because I do as well suffer from depression from everything that's happened to me, to where I have to say, like, I'm not doing well. And these people immediately come and help me and pray for me, and, you know, and it's amazing, and I love that.
How about for you, Mark? What has that road been like for you over this past year?
Well, it was challenging at first. It was just, you know, how are you going to be accepted? I remember going back to work for the first week. And, you know, there were rumors out there about what had gone on. You know, I shared with my team, but, you know, some people didn't know, and there were all kinds of rumors of I was in, you know, drug treatment, alcohol treatment, it was marriage issues and all that type of stuff. And then when people did find out about depression, like, they don't know what to say, you know. So it was kind of, everybody was very standoffish at first, and you know, it's something that I've really tried to let people know it's okay to talk about it. You know, I tell my team all the time, like, it's okay to use a D word, like depression's okay, and everybody has a role in that. Like, it's okay to ask me how I'm doing if you see that I'm not doing well, and people have done that, you know, or they don't necessarily ask me, they'll call my wife and say, is Mark doing okay? But, you know, but it's still, that's, you know, they see certain things that sometimes, you know, it's easy to fall back in those old patterns, and I might not see it, but they do. And then when I think about it, oh yeah, you know, they're right. So like you had said, that community is so important.
I was just going to ask you whether you shared that experience. That we talk a lot about that on the show, that the support that we have around us, the community that we have around us, just can sustains us through our difficult time. We still have to walk the walk, and I've shared that with the death of my husband, that I still have to be the one who walks through my grief, but the support and love that I get allows me to hold my grief, and it seems like both of you have had that shared experience as well, that I can get through this through the love and support that I have.
Yep. But it's also, especially on the depression side, it's still a lot of people not understanding. You know, they don't understand, it still has that stigma, and people are, it's still something that people are uncomfortable, I think, to talk about, and hopefully that will change. I think we've seen a lot of changes, but there's a long ways to go in that.
That's kind of a shared experience, though, too, right? That there's a lot of stigma often placed on women who are in abusive relationships, and where there's a lot of blaming of the victim. Though, well, I don't see why she even stayed in that relationship. What do you mean it takes 4 times? Or what do you mean it takes 7 times to leave? And so it's so interesting that you have these very unique stories with many shared experiences from that. What do you think? Because we're running short of time. This is like amazing.
Went by super fast,
right? You know, this is amazing. But you mentioned stigma. What is the message of hope that you would want to say to the viewing audience out there?
That it's okay to seek help. I've been amazed when my article went out how many people came up to me and they say the number's 1 in 4 people, but I would say it's so much higher in people that deal with it, either themselves, family members, people that they know. Like, people have come up to me so often and said how they've dealt with it and stuff. So just that it's okay to ask for help, that it is out there, and it's nothing to be ashamed of. If you had diabetes, you take your medication, and nobody would say anything.
And getting help is worth it.
Absolutely.
Alexis, your message of hope.
For me, you know, especially after being crowned Miss Minnesota, you know, I've dedicated my year of service to my platform, No More, which, you know, is advocating for victims of domestic violence and sexual assault. And what I always love to share with people is to never allow your past to determine your future. You know, I am literally living proof of that, and just letting people know, to whatever your situation is, even out there to victims, that there is always hope and that there is always resources. and just keep getting up every single time that you fall, because it is very, very difficult, but it's possible. And just knowing that whenever you're ready to make that step, that there are people there that are going to love you and be there for you and just support you. So anybody who's in that type of situation, just go get help.
Excellent. Thank you so much to both of you for being here.
Thank you.
That was the Rocky Cry. We're going to fall down in life. Just keep getting up over and over and over again. What wonderful stories of hope that I think we all can take some inspiration from in our life and help us to move forward in whatever struggles that we have personally, either right now or in our future. Thanks so much for joining the discussion, not just for this week and joining me here, but for all of the past 18 plus episodes that we've done this season and the 5 other seasons before that. Don't forget to visit us on the web at speakyourmindonline.org, where you can find a schedule of our topics and resource links. Next season, I will be back to blogging. This is our 18th and final show for this season. And before we leave you tonight, I want to take this opportunity to thank all of my wonderful guests, these 2 especially tonight, but all of the ones who joined us this season, my WDSE family and my Human Development Center family, for believing that together we can transform how we think about mental illness, one story of hope at a time. Tonight we got a twofer. And most of all, I want to thank each of you for watching, calling in questions, and most importantly, carrying the message of hope forward in our community. Until next season, I'm Dr. Carolyn Phelps. Good night.